Jean's death was only the beginning. The mansion mourned, but Madame was hunting, and if Jada's secret surfaced, Chris' second chance would vanish in blood. The mansion had gone quiet, but not with peace. It was the quiet of absence, of loss. Every corridor seemed to hold its breath, every shadow carried the weight of a boy who was no longer there. Jada sat alone in her room, the letter still on the desk where she had left it. She had read it until the ink blurred from her tears, until the words seared themselves into her memory. With my last breath, I still love you. Her hands shook as she pressed the paper to her chest. I didn't want this, Jean, she whispered into the silence. I was trying to save you both. But her voice was swallowed by walls that did not care. Her mind slipped backward, dragging her into the memory she tried so hard to bury. The night she opened Jean's safe with trembling hands. The stacks of bills and the single checkbook, she took what she needed, every stroke of her pen a theft wrapped in love. The driver she bribed. The quiet ambulance she arranged. The facility far from the city, where no one would think to look for a boy the world had already written off. Chris. Still breathing. Still alive. Still hers. She had hidden him away not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. Because she had known the truth, if she told them about the new donor, if she gave them hope too soon, the patriarch would crush it with his iron certainty. He would drag Chris back, make him the solution whether or not another heart was waiting. Better they thought him dead. Better Jean hated her coldness than her brother be cut open against her will. But Jean. She closed her eyes, pain ripping through her. Jean had believed the lie too fully. He had carried her silence like poison, mistaking her distance for rejection. And in the end, he had ended himself. Her chest tightened. I killed you with the very lie that was meant to protect him. The days dragged on. Jada played the role they expected, the grieving sister, the broken lover. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, eyes swollen, voice gone hoarse from crying. Every word she spoke was calculated, every silence, even more so. When the patriarch snarled about debts, when Madame wept into her handkerchief, Jada said nothing. It was easier to let them believe Chris was gone. Easier to let them bear the guilt of their choice. But every time she closed her door, she pressed her hand against her heart and whispered to the memory of her brother. Hold on, Chris. Just hold on. It'll come back for you. The patriarch buried his grief under duty, pacing the study until his shoes wore the carpet thin. He spoke less, his commands sharper, his gaze harder. He had won his battle, but lost his heir, and the cost turned him into stone. Madame collapsed at first, then stitched herself together with rituals of mourning, flowers laid at Jean's door, candles lit until wax dripped like tears. She smiled less. She prayed more. The servants whispered of curses, to lose both sons, this house is marked. They avoided Jada, as though her presence carried misfortune. The mansion, once loud with power and planning, now echoed with absence. And yet, beneath it all, something stirred. Madame began to notice the strangeness of Jada's grief. When people spoke of Chris, she did not bow her head, did not say his name aloud in prayers. When a servant once offered condolences for both her losses, Jada's face flickered, not sorrow, but a flash of panic quickly buried. One night, passing by Jada's room, Madame paused. Through the door, she heard a whisper, soft, desperate, like a prayer not meant for heaven. Hold on, Chris. Please. Hold on. Madame's breath caught. Her hand tightened around the doorknob. For a moment, suspicion surged. But grief pressed heavier, drowning it back down. She walked away, telling herself she had imagined it. But the seed had been planted. Jada sat at her window, the night air cold against her tear-streaked cheeks. She looked at the stars and tried to believe Chris could feel her from wherever he was hidden. But behind her, unseen, Madame lingered at the end of the hall, clutching Jean's shirt to her chest. And for the first time, a thought crept into her mind, sharp, unsettling. Why does her grief feel different? She shook her head, forcing the thought away. It was too cruel. Too impossible. And yet, the question refused to die. The mansion moved as if underwater. Every voice was hushed, every footstep muted, every glance heavy with absence. Jean's funeral rites had ended, but the air was still thick with incense and sorrow. Jada drifted through it all, her expression carefully sculpted, grief sharpened into silence, sorrow wrapped in numbness. But behind her mask, the lie pressed down harder every day. She told herself she could bear it. For Chris. For the brother who still breathed far away, suspended between life and death. But she had not counted on Madame. At first, Madame wept like any grieving mother, collapsing at the altar, clutching Jean's photo as if she could pull him back through the frame. But days passed, and grief reshaped itself into something colder, more calculating. Madame was not only a mother. She was the wife of a mafia patriarch, the keeper of a house that thrived on secrets. She knew the difference between raw grief and rehearsed sorrow. And when her eyes fell on Jada, she saw cracks. Why did Jada never mention Chris when others did? Why did her tears come at night, in private, rather than at the altar where everyone mourned? Why, above all, did she whisper names to the shadows when she thought no one listened? Suspicion did not scream, it whispered. And Madame had learned long ago to listen to whispers. One afternoon, Madame entered Jada's room without warning. The younger girl startled, snapping a small notebook shut. "What are you writing?" Madame asked softly, her tone gentle, almost motherly. "Just memories of Jean," Jada replied, voice tight. Madame smiled, though her eyes did not. "May I see?" Jada froze. Her fingers tightened around the notebook. Then, carefully, she handed it over. Inside were scribbles, poems of grief, broken sentences, Jean's name repeated like a prayer. All convincing. Almost too convincing. Madame flipped the pages slowly, her gaze lingering. One corner of the paper had a faint indentation, as if a page had been torn out. A detail she tucked away, saying nothing. She returned the book with a smile. "You loved him deeply." Jada's throat tightened. "I did." But when Madame embraced her, Jada stiffened. Her heartbeat thrashed against her ribs, and Madame felt it. That evening at dinner, the patriarch raised a toast to his fallen son. To Jean, who gave his heart for this family, he said firmly, his voice ablaze against the silence. Everyone lowered their heads. Except Madame. She turned her gaze to Jada, watching. Waiting. Jada's lips pressed together. Her eyes did not rise to meet the patriarch's. Instead, she blinked rapidly, fingers curling against her lap as though the words had pierced her too deeply. Too deeply, or wrongly. Madame sipped her wine. The suspicion hardened. Later that night, as the house slept, Madame stopped outside Jada's door once again. From within, she heard the same whisper as before. A plea carved out of grief. "Please, Chris. Don't leave me. Not like him. Please." Madame's hand tightened on the doorknob. Her heart twisted, grief and fury warring in her chest. But she did not enter. Not yet. Instead, she backed away, silent as a shadow, her eyes glinting in the dark. Jada, inside, knelt by her bed, unaware she had been overheard. Her tears soaked the sheets as she clutched the locket Chris had given her years ago. "I'm sorry, Jean," she whispered. "I never wanted this. I was only trying to save him." Her sobs echoed softly through the night. And down the hall, Madame stared out the window into the garden, her reflection pale in the glass. Her lips parted with a whisper only the night could hear. "So. The boy lives." The mansion had learned how to move without a heartbeat. The staff still polished silverware until it gleamed, the patriarch still barked orders from behind his desk, and the chandeliers still glittered against velvet curtains. But it was hollow. The kind of silence that crawled into bones and refused to leave. Every corner whispered Jean's name. Jada carried that silence like chains. She moved from room to room with sunken eyes, her hands sometimes shaking as she clasped them in front of her. She rarely ate. She rarely slept. She was convincing, almost too convincing. Everyone believed she was broken. Everyone except Madame. In her private chamber, where no servant dared enter without knocking, Madame sat before a portrait of Jean. Her fingers traced the outline of his painted jaw, the careful brush strokes that captured the softness of his eyes. Her lips trembled, but her mind did not. Her son was gone, and that truth cut deeper than any blade. But beneath the grief, a quiet voice whispered questions. Jean had been stubborn, yes, but he was not weak. He had always fought to survive, for her, for the family, for the empire he would one day lead. He would never simply give up. So why had he chosen death? The answer, Madame realized, must lie not in Jean's weakness, but in someone else's lies. And when she closed her eyes, only one face appeared in her mind, Jada. Madame did not move quickly. She had been born into this world of silence and shadows. You didn't confront prey, you circled it. Tested the air. Waited for the slip. The next morning, she summoned Hannah, the head maid who had served her loyally for 2 decades. Over tea, Madame asked softly, "You've been watching the girl, haven't you? Tell me what you see." Hannah lowered her head, twisting her apron. "She cries at night, Madame. Sometimes she screams into the pillow." "But..." Madame's gaze sharpened. "But? It is not grief like yours. It is something else. Not for the young master, I think. For the brother, perhaps. She whispers his name." Madame hid her reaction behind a calm sip of tea. Interesting. Very interesting. Her next move was subtle. She summoned the chief surgeon, under the pretense of gratitude. They met in the sitting room. The doctor bowed low, his hands trembling slightly. He still feared the family, even after delivering the worst of news. "You did your best," Madame said, her voice tender. "But tell me. In those last hours, when everything was prepared, did the girl do anything unusual?" The doctor's eyes flickered. His throat bobbed. "There was a delay, Madame. A brief one. The young lady disappeared before the final preparations. She returned later and claimed she had been praying. We thought nothing of it." Madame's smile was soft, motherly even. But inside, her pulse quickened. A delay. Enough time to move pieces around. Enough time to betray. That night, while the house slept, Madame moved silently down the hall. She opened Jada's door without a sound. Jada lay curled in bed, her face wet with tears, clutching Chris' old sweater like a lifeline. The sight almost softened Madame's heart, almost. But she had work to do. Her eyes scanned the desk. Papers, ink, a candle burned low. And there, half hidden beneath an open book, was a scrap of charred paper. Madame lifted it carefully. Her breath caught when she saw the faint letters at the top, the name of a hospital. Not one connected to the family. A different hospital entirely. Her lips curved. The girl had tried to destroy it, but hadn't succeeded. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was a trail. And trails always led somewhere. The next morning, Jada stood in the courtyard, staring blankly at the rising sun. The light painted her skin gold, but her eyes were dark, haunted. Madame approached quietly, her every step deliberate. She rested a gentle hand on Jada's shoulder. You remind me of myself when I was your age, she murmured, carrying grief that no one else could understand. Jada stiffened. Her throat worked, but no words came. Madam's smile was faint, her voice as soft as silk. Don't worry, child. The truth always surfaces. Always. She left her there, frozen in the dawn light. And when Madame returned to her chambers, she placed the burned receipt on her desk, smoothing it flat with delicate fingers. Her eyes gleamed like a hawk that had finally sighted prey. The game had begun. The days dragged heavy as winter fog. The mansion moved on with its rigid discipline, but the air felt sharper, as if every wall had ears, every corner had eyes. Jada kept her head low. She played her part, the grieving almost widow, the dutiful sister who had nowhere else to go. But every night she dreamed of Chris. Machines humming. A faint pulse under pale skin. Far away, but not far enough. Hidden, but not invisible. And every morning, Madame watched her more closely. The charred paper never left Madame's private desk. She studied it like scripture, smoothing its edges, tracing the faint hospital crest. It was not their hospital. Not the one under the family's control. Which meant secrecy. Which meant betrayal. A single question bloomed in Madame's mind and rooted deeper each hour. What exactly did she hide from us the night my son died? Madame never confronted directly. She began instead with whispers. At breakfast, she asked the cook, "Did the girl eat last night?" "No, Madame." At tea, she asked Hannah, "Has she written any letters recently?" The maid hesitated. "I did find scraps of torn envelopes in her waste bin. But they were blank, Madame. Or already burned." And later, Madame pressed the doctor again, her tone wrapped in honey. "When she returned that night, the delay you mentioned, how long was she gone?" The doctor faltered. 20 minutes. Perhaps longer. 20 minutes. In a crisis like that, it was an eternity. Jada herself was unraveling. Her grief was convincing, but her guilt leaked through in quiet moments. She lingered too long near Jean's portrait, whispering apologies no one should have heard. She snapped at servants who offered condolences, her voice edged with too much rage for simple mourning. She spent long hours in the garden, clutching her locket, staring at nothing, lips moving as though in prayer, though no words could be heard. To Madame, all of it was confirmation. The girl was not grieving honestly. She was hiding something. One evening, Madame entered Jada's chamber without warning. Jada sprang to her feet, nearly knocking over the candle at her desk. Madame's eyes flicked across the room, the neatly folded blanket, the locked drawer, the faint smell of burned paper that no fresh air could quite erase. "I worry for you, child," Madame said softly. "Loss eats at the soul. It changes people. Sometimes. It drives them to strange decisions." Jada forced her voice steady. "I've made no decisions, Madame. I only survive." Madame stepped closer, cupping Jada's cheek with motherly tenderness. Survive. A good word. But survival always comes at a price." She let the words hang in the air, then withdrew, her perfume lingering long after she left. Jada collapsed into her chair the moment the door closed, her breath shallow. She could feel it now, the circle tightening. The following week, Madame made her first bold move. She sent for a man loyal only to her, a fixer who thrived in silence. He arrived at midnight, slipping into her chambers like a shadow. Madame handed him the charred receipt, folded into an envelope. "Find the hospital. Find the records. Do not be seen." The man bowed once and vanished. When the door closed, Madame returned to Jean's portrait, her hand trembling only once before she steadied it. "Rest, my son," she whispered. "I will uncover what poisoned your last days." I will not let her lies go unpunished. That night, Jada dreamed of sirens. She dreamed of Chris being wheeled into light he wasn't ready for. She woke gasping, sweat slick against her skin. And when she stumbled to the window, she saw Madam's silhouette in the garden, still awake, standing alone under the moon. Watching the house. Watching her. Jada clutched the window ledge until her knuckles went white. She knew then, the secret wasn't safe anymore. The mansion had grown silent since Jean's death. Not the quiet of mourning, that would have been merciful. No, this silence was heavier, hungrier. Servants spoke in whispers, doors closed softly, even the clock seemed to tick more cautiously, as though the very walls feared to provoke the patriarch's wrath. But it was Madame who haunted the halls the most. Her grief was a shadow that trailed her everywhere, her silks unkempt, her face pale and fevered with sleeplessness. Still, she did not break the way others expected. No, her grief was sharper than tears, sharper than despair. It was suspicion. She could not forget Jada's face at the funeral, her stiff silence, her swollen eyes, yes, but something else too. A bitterness buried under her grief. The way she flinched when Madame said, "At least he did not die in vain. At least his heart kept Chris alive." Jada had turned away too quickly, as if struck by a hidden lash. It was then that Madame began to wonder. Her doubts festered in secret. She dispatched a fixer, one of the old men who had cleaned the family's dirtiest affairs for decades, to gather records. "You will leave no trace," she whispered to him late one night. "Find the boy's trail. I must know if his body truly rests where they said it does." The man bowed and disappeared into the shadows. Weeks passed. Madame filled the void by playing the part of the grieving widow and bereaved mother. She wore black at every meal. She wept at the portrait of Jean hung above the stairs. She let the patriarch believe her silence was loyalty. But in the dead hours, when the house slept, she would pace her chambers, replaying the memories. The night of the operation. Jada's screams echoing down the hall. The doctors carrying charts with too much haste, too much secrecy. And Jada's silence afterward, not grief alone, but something colder. The fixer returned on a rain-slick evening. His face was drawn, his hands unsteady as he placed a slim black folder on her desk. "I found him," he said simply. Madame's breath caught. She dismissed him with a nod, though her hands trembled as she untied the twine. Inside were hospital intake records, photocopied and watermarked. A photograph of a boy on a gurney, pale but alive, tubes threading his arms. His name scrawled across the top. Christopher Jackson. Status, stabilized. Condition, coma. Location, transferred under private request. The last page bore a shaky signature. Madame traced her finger over it, heart pounding. Jada. Her suspicions hardened into certainty. Madame did not confront her immediately. Rage, she knew, was a blunt weapon. But grief sharpened her into something more patient. At dinner the next night, she played her hand with delicate precision. "I dreamed of Jean," she said softly, her spoon clinking gently against porcelain. "He was smiling. He told me Chris was with him now." The patriarch grunted, uninterested. But Jada went still. Her spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered against the bowl, the sound far too loud in the quiet dining hall. Madame's eyes flicked toward her, narrow and gleaming. "Strange dream, isn't it? Almost comforting." Jada mumbled an excuse and excused herself. Too quickly. Too stiffly. And Madame knew. That night, long after the halls had stilled, Madame entered Jada's room without knocking. The girl sat hunched over a desk, a single candle casting her face in trembling light. In her hands, a photograph, Jean and Chris, both smiling in some forgotten summer. "Tell me it isn't true," Madame whispered. Jada jerked upright, the photograph nearly slipping from her grasp. What? Do not play me for a fool. Madam stepped forward, her voice low and venomous. I know the boy lives. I know you took him. You let my son die believing a lie. Jada's mask shattered. Her shoulders shook, tears spilling freely as she clutched the photo to her chest. I had no choice. If I told him, you would have dragged Chris to the table like cattle. You would have carved him apart. I couldn't lose him too. You couldn't? Madam's voice cracked into fury, her grief exploding at last. You let Gene destroy himself. You let him die thinking his heart belonged to your brother. You gave him silence, and that silence killed him more surely than the gun. I thought I had time. Jada sobbed. I thought when he was stronger, when he healed, I could tell him the truth. I didn't know, I didn't think. Strong enough? Madam's tears burned down her cheeks. Her hand lashed out, striking the desk so hard the candle quivered. He is in the ground, Jada. In the ground because of your secrets. For a long time, neither spoke. Only their ragged breaths filled the silence, the candle sputtering between them. Then Madam straightened, wiping her tears with trembling fingers. The softness in her face hardened into something far crueler. You stole my son's peace. You let him drown in despair when a single word might have saved him. And now. She leaned closer, her eyes like cold steel. Don't you dare hide his brother as well. Jada rose shakily, her voice breaking. Please. He's all I have left. Please don't touch him. Madam's lips curved into a smile that was nothing but scar tissue. No, child. He's all I have left. She turned sharply, her skirts whispering like knives as she swept from the room. Jada collapsed to the floor, clutching the photograph to her chest, her sobs muffled by trembling hands. But beneath the grief, terror hollowed her. The truth was out. And now the family would come for Chris. This time, there would be no mercy. Now the hunt begins. The duffel bag slipped from Jada's trembling hands, crashing softly against the tiles. Her chest rose and fell in jagged bursts as she stood by Chris Gurney, staring at his still face. Machines ticked around him like impatient clocks, reminding her with every beep that time was running out. She knows. The words hadn't left Madam's lips hours ago, they had struck like a knife. Jada could still feel the woman's eyes on her, cold and sharp, cutting deeper than any blade. It had been in the study, where Gene's portrait hung like a silent witness. Madam's voice was calm, but her calmness was venom. You think I wouldn't notice? She had said, rosary beads clicking slowly through her fingers. The way you flinch at his name? The way your grief smells of guilt, not loss? Jada's throat had closed. Her palms had slicked with sweat, but she forced her face into stone. You're imagining things, she had whispered. But Madam leaned closer, her perfume thick with roses and gunpowder. Chris lives. And if he lives, you've betrayed us all. The silence that followed was suffocating. Madam didn't press further. She didn't need to. Her certainty was enough. Now, in the dim glow of the clinic room, Jada pressed her hands to her face. She saw Gene again. The way his laughter filled the mansion halls. The way he promised he'd protect Chris, even if it cost him everything. And the way he died, because she made him believe Chris was gone forever. The guilt pressed on her chest like a hand intent on crushing her ribs. If I had just told him the truth. If I had trusted him. But it was too late. The truth had buried him. And now it threatened to bury Chris. The nurse appeared at the door, eyes wide. It's time. If we wait any longer, they'll have people at every exit. Jada wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, forcing her hands to steady. She checked the straps on Chris Gurney, then reached for the revolver tucked inside her coat. "Then we move now." The wheels squealed as the gurney rolled down the hall, each sound magnified, unbearable. Jada's breath caught with every corner they turned, every shadow that stretched across the sterile floor. Outside the mansion, Madame stood on the balcony, watching the city bleed into night. Beside her, 2 black sedans idled in the driveway, engines humming like predators waiting for a signal. "Shall run," Madame murmured, her eyes never leaving the distance. "She's stubborn enough to think she can outwit me. But grief makes fools of even the strongest." Her driver gave a short nod. Within moments, the cars peeled out of the gates, disappearing into the streets. Back at the clinic, Jada shoved open the rear door. Night air slapped her face as she and the nurse wheeled Chris into the alley. For a moment, silence. Just the faint hum of the city. Then came the growl. Headlights flared at both ends of the street, flooding the alley in harsh white light. 2 black sedans closed in like jaws snapping shut. The nurse froze, her grip on the gurney loosening. "No, no, no." Jada moved without hesitation, shoving the gurney against the wall, stepping in front of her brother. Her hand wrapped around the revolver inside her coat, the cold steel burning against her palm.